Hello, and welcome to our first module in language literacy and culture. In this module, we're going to spend some time looking at different theories of first language acquisition and trying to apply them to our practices and our learning. But before we do that, before we get into those theories, let's take a second to look at why we might want to study language and why, as classroom teachers, we should know about language. So first, it helps us to teach our content. Our subject matter develops through language. We can't teach our content without teaching the language of our content. We teach our students the vocabulary, the reading strategies, the organization of thought that are based on our subject matter. Second, language is human. It's born with us. It's what separates us from other intelligent beings. It's also part of our culture, and it's how we share our culture. It's how we share who we are, where we're from, and what we believe. And third, it helps us to understand the brain and maybe how the brain works. It helps us to understand the mind, how we think, and maybe why we think some of the things that we do. It might also help us when we're working with students who are developing language skills like our English language learners and helping us understand what their brain is doing as they're developing the English skills that we're trying to help them acquire. So let's look at some of the theories of first language acquisition. The first real theory that we know about is the Behaviorist Theory. And while we talk about these, you're probably going to have a flashback to your Intro to Psych course in your undergrad. But the behaviorists led by B.F. Skinner said that students and young children develop language based on reinforcement and imitation. That sounds, sentences, and phrases are reinforced or corrected. And that's how young people develop language. Well, this theory has been refuted because there's some pretty significant flaws. First, language is way too complex to just be reinforced. And children, we know, don't just imitate language. If they did, they wouldn't make the sounds or the sentences that they do when they're first beginning to learn how to speak or communicate. Also, children don't always respond to corrections when they're learning language, and that would go against the behavioral approach. We know that children develop language not based on corrections, but based on their changing view of the world and their changing view of how they interact with the world. Also, the behaviorist approach says that we learn based on our environment. But when we look at language development, there are several different key timelines and key patterns in how children develop languages. So we know that most children develop language in the same time frame, and they develop it based on the same order. But if that's true, then that would definitely refute the behaviorist, because we know that our students learn in very diverse settings. They live in very diverse settings, so that they wouldn't necessarily be able to develop the same language in the same way if they were coming from different backgrounds. Chomsky, Noam Chomsky, who you're going to hear about a few times in this module, and you'll be able to listen to him when you watch some of the videos. He was a linguist, and he believed that language was innate. He said that you were born with a language acquisition device. And while this isn't a specific area of your brain, he said that the brain was pre-wired to develop language. And one of the things that he used to support this theory was his idea of universal grammar. And he said that all languages have the same building blocks. And because of that, or as a result of the wiring in the brain, people are born to learn languages. It's an innate skill. And what we notice is that language acquisition follows a typical timeline and order. We spoke about that a second ago. We also know that young children speak using some of the rules that complex speakers know. For example, a young child will say, "Dog run," not "run dog," but "dog run," because they know that the subject follows the verb. So as they're watching their puppy run, dog run. Second, children develop an understanding of language and rules in the processes without formal instruction. A toddler is not taught where to put different words or different sounds. They do that naturally. And so if there's no formal instruction, there's no reinforcement of that instruction, kind of supports his theory that language and language development is a little bit more innate. The social interaction theory builds off of Chomsky's theory, but also says that we need to look at the biological and the social interaction. And the key theorist here, or the key psychologist here, is Lev Vygotsky. And Lev Vygotsky says that children are largely motivated to learn their language, and that children create situations, not adults, but children create situations where they communicate or they cause people to interact with them. And while they are listening to people speak to them, they are learning the language that they need to communicate and get what they need. A key and important idea related to the social interaction theory is that children develop language faster when they are able to make mistakes or when they're not corrected on their mistakes. And there's some research that says that when children are corrected on their languages and their speech development and their speech errors early on, that actually delays speech because children don't want to speak as much. The active construction of a grammar theory says that children develop their own theory or their own rules, of grammar. So children listen, they notice patterns, and then they think about or they develop rules about why those patterns are there in speech. And then they take that, and as they grow, they modify those rules as they listen to more complex things. They are more capable of more complex thought. And then the Connectionist theory is based on a neurological approach, which says that as we hear things and as we associate sounds with different things, we create neural networks. Wernicke and Broca were two important psychologists who studied language in the brain. Broca studied a part of the brain that was pretty important with production of speech, and Wernicke studied a part of the brain that was important in the understanding of speech. And language is pretty cool. It's a pretty cool thing to understand and learn about. And your text will talk about that. Chapter 1 has a pretty good introduction about why language is interesting. So think about those things. Think about which theory you might subscribe to the most. Probably the most accepted theory right now is the active construction of a grammar theory. But there's definitely benefits to each of these theories. So let's take a look at what we're going to be doing in Module 1 real fast. So in Module 1, it is kind of heavy on the reading. Chapter 1 is just a quick intro. Chapter 2 in both books are the theories, and Chapter 4 goes over an intro to phonology. There's also the module videos, which you should check out to support the reading and the ideas. 2 videos on Chomsky, so some videos on language and children. I want to point out that if this is on your screen when you log in to watch the videos, just scroll down, use your McDaniel username and password to log in, and it should take you to the video. There's 3 questions that you're going to be participating on in the module forum. And remember, you should post early, and then you should continue to follow up throughout the module on these 3 discussions, interacting with your colleagues. So the first question asks you to look at what does it mean for diverse learners in diverse times and apply that to your setting. And be sure to relate that back to our topics of language, literacy, and culture. How have you seen culture change, and how do you perceive your classroom setting or your school setting being unique in terms of diversity? The second one relates back to our first language acquisition theories. Think about which theory you might agree with most, and why do you connect with it? What do you like? What do you dislike about that theory? And the third one is kind of an application. So think about the first language acquisition theories, but also think about something that you do, some piece of your curriculum, some instructional practice, or some assessment method, and connect that back to first language acquisition. And is it supportive or is it not? Make sure you relate that back to the text. At some point during the module, make sure that you take time to post in your learning log. Remember I said in the intro video, the learning log is requirement, but it should also be informal. Use it how you want to, and I've seen students format their learning log in many different ways. The deliverable for this module is an interview and a reflection. And you don't need to have finished the reading to complete this assignment. So I would take a look at this early on. Step 1 asks you to create interview, 5 to 7 questions, and then pick 3 different people to interview. They could be 3 colleagues, they could be any 3 stakeholders that you work with in your educational setting. If you are working with a colleague or have a colleague in this class, I would encourage you to work together to develop questions as a pair and maybe conduct your interview together. That's fine. And I understand that based on the times, that's not going to be a face-to-face interview. So maybe you want to do it in a Zoom or a Google Team or Google Meet or Google Teams. Or in this case, if it's done through email, that's okay too. Once you've done your interview, then your assignment will be to write a 2 to 3 page paper reflecting on your video and connecting it back to the text. Your first step is to state who you interview, what's their role, and so try to get people 3 different roles represented. And why did you think it was important to interview them? What did you think that they might contribute? And then summarize what they share and what you took away. And you can write your summary in whatever format works best for you. You can summarize each individual person's ideas, or you can summarize the common themes that you found throughout your interviews. Next, connect it back to the text, either one of the 2 course text, maybe a video, or if you want an outside text, that's fine as well. And the big thing is your so what. Now that you've heard from stakeholders, now that you've read, you've digested your own ideas, you've watched the videos on language, what does this mean? This is an important step because in the last module, you'll actually be creating an action plan for improving language literacy and diversity in your school setting. So maybe some of the ideas that come out of your interview will help you with that later. When you're done, you've checked out the rubric to make sure that you've met all the requirements, you've included your questions, you've written your summary, you analyze, and you've identified your so what. Include your questions, include your summary, include an APA reference page, and turn it in by clicking the link. So I hope you find this module interesting. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. If you wouldn't mind, take a second to post a quick intro of yourself in the class cafe. Look forward to seeing you all on the discussion boards.